Hello children, I hope you have gone through the previous lesson where we learnt about the different categories of pathogens. Today we are going to deal with some diseases caused by bacteria or bacterial diseases. The first disease that we have to learn in detail is typhoid. The disease typhoid. Let's see what is a causative organism or the causal organism of the disease typhoid. Typhoid is caused by the bacteria Salmonella typhi. I hope all of you remember that when we write a scientific name, the genus must begin with a capital letter and the species with a small letter. And when you write it, I'm sure you remember that it has to be underlined because in the print it comes in an italics, but when we write it has to be underlined. So the causative organism for typhoid disease is Salmonella typhi. Now let us discuss how this disease is transmitted from one person to another or mode of transmission. There are different types by which the disease typhoid is transmitted from one person to another. The first method is through contaminated food and water. When a person consumes contaminated food or water which contains these bacterial spores, definitely the infection spreads from one person to another. It can also be spread through contaminated food which is contaminated through houseflies. Suppose houseflies go and visit a contaminated site and the housefly or the cockroach comes and visits our home. Definitely there are chances of the disease spreading from one person to another. The third method of transmission is faulty hygiene. What do you mean by faulty hygiene? Suppose you have gone to the washroom and you do not wash your hands properly, or you have gone out somewhere and you come back, you do not wash your hands properly. These are all faulty personal hygiene. So if a person does not have proper hygienic methods or protocols, there are chances of the disease spreading from one person to another. And the fourth one is carriers. Now what exactly are carriers? Carrier is a person who harbors the disease-causing pathogen, for example, Salmonella typhi, without exhibiting any kind of symptom. They remain asymptomatic. This particular individual, suppose the carrier is a cook for an organization or at home, there are possibilities that the disease spreads from the carrier to a healthy person. So carriers are those individuals who remain asymptomatic. They harbor the disease-causing organism, but they do not exhibit or manifest any kind of symptoms. So these are the four methods by which disease is transmitted from one person to another. Now let us go on to incubation period. Incubation period means the time taken by a bacteria or a pathogen to enter a healthy human being and the time in between for it to exhibit the signs and symptoms. The period between infection and exhibition of the symptom or manifestation of the symptom is known as the incubation period. The incubation period for Salmonella typhi is 1 to 3 weeks. So if we are infected in this particular week, probably the symptom comes only 3 weeks later. Now you are very familiar with the incubation period in the so-called COVID disease that is happening. In the same way, the incubation period for typhoid is 1 to 3 weeks. Okay, let us now pass on to the symptoms of the disease. When the bacteria enters into our gastrointestinal tract, it reaches the GI tract and from there it enters into the bloodstream. The bacteria now enters into the bloodstream. When they enter into the bloodstream, these bacteria are lysed, or lysis happens. When lysis happens, what is released are toxins. Toxins are released from the pathogen, and these toxins cause weakness in the patient as well as high and sustained fever. The fever for almost 39 to 40 degrees Celsius, it is sustained. Even when you take antipyretics like paracetamol, the fever does not go down. So that is a very classical symptom of typhoid, where there is high and sustained fever for almost 39 to 40 degrees Celsius. So that is the second symptom. The third symptom is, from the bloodstream, the bacteria may go and attack other organs like the ileum, the spleen as well as the liver. So the ileum, spleen and liver are affected. This may cause loss of appetite, constipation as well as general fatigue. So constipation and loss of appetite. In severe cases, what happens is the bacteria may cause intestinal perforations, small holes in the intestine, which may lead to internal bleeding or internal hemorrhage, which is quite fatal. So these are the symptoms of typhoid disease. We now pass on to confirmatory test. How does a doctor diagnose whether a patient is suffering from typhoid? Now, merely because the patient shows high temperature, it doesn't mean that the patient has typhoid. So there is a confirmatory test called as Vidal's test, where blood sample is taken and it is subjected to the presence of antibodies, and this particular, when the titer value of antibody is relatively high, the doctor can confirm that the patient has the disease called as typhoid. So the name of the confirmatory test is Vidal's test. Now we pass on to the prevention. Now we saw prevention is always linked with the mode of transmission. Now mode of transmission is contaminated food and water. So definitely prevention should be to maintain community sanitation. Definitely to maintain community sanitation. Second is to make sure that you do not consume contaminated food and water. Make sure the food is properly cooked so that all the bacteria are destroyed. Then the third method is to avoid eating food which is exposed to cockroaches as well as houseflies, and sometimes there are possibilities of typhoid becoming a small epidemic. In such situations, there are vaccines, but these vaccines are, they provide immunity only for 3 years, and it is normally done only when there is a small epidemic in a localized area. So these are the preventions. Coming to the cure of the disease is, since it's a bacterial disease, definitely antibiotics which are suitable for destroying this particular bacteria can be used for destroying the particular pathogen. I would also like to highlight about carrier. Now, I don't know if you have heard about Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary was a very infamous personality who kept spreading this disease. Now, I'll tell you a small story. I'll read out a small story about Typhoid Mary. This is a story of a woman who was a human incubator of the dreaded disease typhoid fever. The primary source of infection is the feces and urine of these carriers. A carrier, as I said earlier, is an infected person who harbors a specific infectious agent and do not show a particular disease. These carriers are more dangerous than because they escape recognition and continue to live a normal routine life amongst population, keeping on infecting more and more. This story elaborates a life journey of Mary Mallon, who was born in 1869 at Ireland. Mary immigrated to United States, US, at the age of 15 and later on became a cook for a family at New York who paid her better wages. It all began in 1900 when only after 10 days of employment with the first family, residents began coming down with typhoid fever. Mary quit the job and moved on to the next job at Manhattan, where about a week later, several family members grew ill and one person died of typhoid. Mary still did not realize the connection between the disease and herself and once again quickly moved out and joined a lawyer's house, making 7 out of 8 people in that family sick. By now, Mary realized that there was some connection between her and the disease, and feeling guilty, she spent more time taking care of the sick households, making the matter worse. Mary then moved on to Long Island in 1906, where she resumed her services as a cook at a house of Mr. Charles Henry Warren and soon infected 6 out of 11 households. Then Mr. Warren hired Dr. George Sopermer, an epidemiologist, for investigation of the typhoid fever. By the time Dr. Soper suspected Mary as the cause of the outbreak, she quit the job. He then traced her employment history for more clues. Finally, Dr. Soper found Mary working as a cook in March 1907 at Walter Brown's home. When Mary refused to test for herself, Dr. Soper informed the health department in New York. The police finally forcefully took her to Wild Parker Hospital in New York, where she was tested for stool examination and found to be positive for typhoid bacteria. The health department then transferred Mary to an isolated cottage at Riverside Hospital in North Brother Island. In February 1910, a new health commissioner decided to make her free on the assurance by affidavit that she will not work as a cook upon release and will take necessary hygienic precautions. Mary Mallon changed her name to Mary Brown and started cooking up a storm, infecting as many as possible she could. Feeling healthy, Mary still could not believe that she could spread the disease. In January 1915, the Sloane Maternity Hospital in Manhattan suffered a typhoid fever outbreak, leading to 25 cases and 2 deaths. Soon evidences pointed to a recently hired cook, Mrs. Mary Brown. Mary was again sent to the same North Brother Island where she was released from the last time. She remained imprisoned for the rest of her life for 23 years. In 1932, Mary suffered a large stroke that left her paralyzed and she died in 1938. This story teaches us the importance of identification of such Mary Mallons in the community and their isolation for adequate treatment. That is why she is referred as Typhoid Mary. So this is the way disease spreads from a carrier who functions as a cook. Okay children, so now you heard Mary Mallon's story or the Typhoid Mary story. We now pass on the next bacterial disease, which is known as pneumonia. We learnt typhoid. The second disease is pneumonia. Pneumonia is caused by 2 bacteria. Streptococcus pneumoniae and Haemophilus influenzae. There are two bacteria which causes the disease, Streptococcus pneumoniae and Haemophilus influenzae. Both of them are causative organisms. Passing on to mode of transmission. Now children, you will find that this lesson I have also added slides. So though the board is not very clear, there are slides which makes the entire lesson very clear. So don't worry if this is not very visible to you. Let us now pass on to the mode of transmission for the disease pneumonia. Pneumonia is transmitted through droplet infection. Now all of you know what droplet infection is. When a person sneezes, coughs or spits, the bacteria are released in the form of aerosols, and these aerosols are quite heavy and they behave as droplets and they may settle down. So if the droplet reaches from one person, infected person, to healthy person through air, such a kind of infection is known as droplet infection. So droplet infection through the aerosols, that is the first way of transmission. The second method of transmission is through the sputum or the cobum of an infected person. When a person spits, sputum, the bacteria present in the sputum, that can also be released as into the air and that can cause diseases. The third one is by sharing of articles with an infected person, like utensils or towels. If somebody shares, an infected person shares it with a healthy person, there are possibilities of the disease spreading from one person to another. So these are the three ways by which the disease spreads from one person to another. Mode of transmission. Let us come to incubation period, the period between the entry of the pathogen and the manifestation of the disease. In the case of pneumonia is 3 days, just 3 days. And this particular incubation period, let me also highlight that pneumonia usually affects the elderly adults or the young children. If it affects the elderly adults, it is called as lobular pneumonia, where the alveoli is the most affected part. And in children, it is called as bronchopneumonia, where the bronchioles of the respiratory tract is most infected, most affected. So it could be either lobular pneumonia in elderly people or bronchopneumonia in small children. Now let us pass on to the symptoms of the disease. Now symptoms, the first symptom is there is severe chill and fever. The patient starts experiencing high fever as well as chills. This is followed by cough and headache. The patient experiences severe cough as well as headache, and there is pain in the chest while breathing. When you breathe, the patient experiences pain in the chest. So definitely you can understand that it is the respiratory system which is affected the most. The next one is, as the severity of the disease increases, the alveoli, the bacteria are lysed in the alveoli and there, as well as in the respiratory tract, and there is collection of fluid in the small bronchioles as well as in the alveoli, and that causes insufficient ventilation, because you may remember that the alveolar surface is the place where respiratory gas exchange occurs. So when there is fluid accumulated in these areas, what happens is there is insufficient ventilation. Oxygen is not, exchanged through the surface, and that can lead to severe discomfort for the patient. And in severe cases, very severe cases, due to lack of oxygen, oxygen deprived to the extremities of the body, the lips as well as the tips of the fingernails starts becoming bluish grey in color, bluish or greyish in color, and that is mainly because there is deprivation of oxygen to these extremities. So these are the symptoms as far as the disease is concerned. Now passing on to prevention. Now we learnt that always prevention is linked with mode of transmission. So when there is a patient suffering from typhoid, the best way to prevent its spread is to isolate the patient. When the patient is isolated, definitely the spread of the disease is also reduced. And the last one is cure. Now as we know that it is a bacterial disease, cure happens when there is a suitable antibiotic administered for this particular disease. So this gives you an overview of the disease pneumonia. Now you've learnt about two diseases in detail. I would like all of you to list out 5 to 6 more diseases caused by bacteria. Now I don't want you to Google. You think about diseases that you have learned in lower classes and make a list which contains the name of the bacteria as well as the name of the disease as well as the causative organism. Prepare a tabular column and later on you can look at the slide which I have attached along with this lesson. Thank you.